The Mycenaean civilization flourished throughout the Late Bronze Age, reaching its peak between 14 and 1200 BCE. These Bronze Age Greeks were known as the Achaioi or Achaeans, who originated from the region of Argolis. Eventually, they were able to spread across Peloponnese and the rest of the Greek mainland, conquer Crete and the Aegean Sea, establish a foothold in Asia Minor, and rival some of the great empires of the Near East. When it comes to their origins, the Mycenaeans were direct descendants of the Middle Helladic Greeks who inhabited areas of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Argos. If we go further into the past, traces of early or Proto-Mycenaean culture bring us to the period of Early Bronze Age. This was a time far removed from literacy. There were no written historical records or contemporary sources that could give us a clear picture of what was transpiring on the Greek mainland at the time. All we have are the archaeological remains based on which we can only vaguely assess this early period. Helladic chronology is a relative dating system used in archaeology for the Bronze Age periodization of pottery and other artifacts on the Greek mainland. It complements the other two Aegean contemporary chronologies, those being Cycladic and Minoan. The Helladic periods are thus divided into Early, Middle, and Late Helladic, which roughly correspond to Early, Middle, and Late Bronze Age. Early Helladic is then subdivided into further three periods, the earliest of which, Early Helladic I, spans from 3200 to 2650 BCE. This period is mainly marked by the Eutresis culture, which flourished in Boeotia at the time, in settlements such as Eutresis, Thebes, and Orchomenus. Another important population center was in Euboea, in the settlement of Manica. When it comes to Argolis, the region had been populated since the Neolithic times, although to a much smaller scale. Mycenae itself was still a very small community situated on the Acropolis Hill. Two of the chief settlements in the area during Early Helladic were Tiryns and Lerna. While the identity of the population of these settlements is unknown, archaeologists estimate a population of between 1 and 2,000 for Tiryns and close to 700 inhabitants for Lerna. Lerna was also home to one of the largest prehistoric tumuli burial mounds, accumulated during continuous occupation since the Neolithic. Early Helladic saw transition into the so-called Korakou culture, lasting from 2650 to 2200 BCE. During this time, settlements across Greece were fortified, signaling both increase in strength of the prehistoric polities, but also potential hostilities. Great variety of burial sites across Greece suggests that Korakou period was not necessarily a single uniform culture, but rather that Greece consisted of numerous prehistoric polities, possibly containing several groups of peoples with unknown relations to one another. In Lerna, the settlement saw construction of a double-ring defensive wall with towers and a gate. At the center of the settlement was a large two-story building, known as the House of the Tiles. In the neighboring Tiryns, fortifications were also erected. A large circular building at the center of the settlement likely served as the administrative center or residence of the Tyrrhenian ruler. Towards the end of Early Helladic II, Tiryns and Lerna saw noticeably different developments. In Tiryns, there appears to be a transitional period when it comes to both pottery and buildings. At the lower citadel, which was a residential area, a section of buildings was seemingly destroyed by fire and reconstructed almost in the same alignment. Several buildings of a new style were incorporated into the settlement, some of them apsidal, substituting the rectangular ones from the previous period. When it comes to pottery, ceramic ware at the settlements shows continuity of Early Helladic II, with only a small influx of new designs. As a whole, Tiryns continued as a major early bronze center with very little disturbance, but rather incorporation of several new archaeological elements. In Lerna, however, we see a much different occurrence. There were no signs of any archaeological transition leading to the very end of early Helladic II. By 2200 BC, however, there was a sudden and drastic change. There seems to have been an attack on the settlement, as a result of which Lerna was sacked. The monumental House of the Tiles was destroyed by fire, and the early Helladic II culture discontinued. From this point on, Lerna was reduced to a small satellite village that contained little more than a temeless burial mound. Tiryns, by contrast, maintained its position as the chief settlement in Argolis. The subsequent early Helladic III period is thus known as the Tiryns culture. This period lasted from 2200 to 2000 BC and is centered around the citadel of Tiryns, by now the uncontested chief settlement in the region. Tiryns saw gradual but continuous introduction of new shapes and types of decoration into the ceramic production, signaling possible openness to increased outside influence. Archaeologists hence called the Tiryns culture a period of cultural fusion that incorporated the previous practices of early Helladic with new elements, possibly associated with gradual emergence of new population. While the previous early Helladic II pottery style still largely persisted in Tiryns itself, the surrounding areas, including Lerna, saw emergence of a new style of ware. This was the dark on light patterned ware with geometric ornament, rectilinear in shape. Similarly, a new style of pottery was introduced in central Greece, although it was the light on dark class, known as the Aya Marina ware. In Tiryns, the architecture nevertheless continued to change, especially in the residential lower citadel. Apsidal buildings continued to replace the rectangular style of the previous period. The new dark on-line pottery style was also produced, although to a much lesser degree than elsewhere. Overall, it seems that the Tiryns culture indeed served as a transition period, where new culture continued to take hold towards the end of the third millennium. Unfortunately, lack of any other evidence besides the archaeological limits our insight on what exactly was taking place during this time. Did the destruction of Lerna come at the hands of a new culture, perhaps prehistoric ancestors of the Mycenaeans? Were they already infiltrated in Tiryns during the transition at the end of early Helladic II, and then destroyed their rivals in neighboring Lerna? Unfortunately, much of this is very difficult to determine based on archaeology alone. When it comes to pottery, at least some of this appears to be the case. Excavations at Lerna suggest that the grey burnished pottery of the Tiryns culture served as the direct predecessor of the so-called Minian ware of the Middle Helladic Age. Even at Tiryns itself, where pottery of the previous period still persisted, it too began to change. Although the dark on light pottery had been present only in small percentage, by the time it evolved into the argive variety of the Minian ware, it finally came into more widespread use. By the start of the Middle Helladic period in 2000 BCE, the transitional period in Argolis was completed. Whether these Middle Helladic Greeks emerged through the so-called cultural fusion of the Tiryns culture period, or were already present in Tiryns by the time Lerna was burned, remains a matter of scholarly debate. They continued to further fortify their settlements as they consolidated in their core region of Argolis. One of these settlements came to be of a particular importance: the citadel of Mycenae.